بسم الله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا فسبحانك اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. All praise due to Allah, Lord of the cosmos. I bear witness that there is no deity of worship less Allah. So do I bear witness that Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam is his final messenger who was sent as a glad tidings and a warner with reward and punishment. Dear brothers and sisters, I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make me and you as part of the folks of the glorious Quran, Ahlillahi wa khassatih. This is a response to your request of tackling this knowledge of Tajweed or treating this knowledge of Tajweed from the basics that will match with all levels of viewers and listeners. This knowledge is very crucial, which are entitled now Al-Madkhal fi Tajweed, or bima'na Al-Madkhal fi Ilm Tajweed, an introduction into the sciences of Tajweed. How can we enhance our Quranic recitation? How can we articulate the basic phonemes, letters of the glorious Quran in the right manner, as it was taught in the lifetime of prophethood? How can we recite the glorious Quran as demanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? How can we recite the Quran in coincidence to the statements of Allah Azza wa Jal, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا الَّذِينَ آتَيْنَاهُمُ الْكِتَابَ يَتْلُونَهُ حَقَّ تِلَاوَتِهِ? How can we reach to that standard? Inshallah, that is the main motive behind the designation. That is the main motive behind these presentations. So this will be the new trend of this series of lectures that we will give under this regard, by considering this knowledge in two phases: the classical phase, which is the old Tajweed, and the new Tajweed or the modern Tajweed. When I talk about the old Tajweed, I will emanate from the time that the Tajweed was in its oral form, أي بمعنى في صفته المنطوقة إلى صفته المكتوبة, from the oral to the written, down to modern methodology and research in this field, which matches the knowledge or the sciences of phonetics and then the physics of sounds. So that means that there will be a time that we will not just come on board, we will bring diagrams, especially when we reach to the point of articulation, makharij al-huruf. We look at the bilabial point of articulation, the nasal point of articulation, by looking at diagrams that will help us understand a'ba and nutq, okay, the vocal cavities and everything, how sound is being produced, which will give us a better horizon of how the Prophet ﷺ used to convey the Quran to the Sahabas. We don't have anyone with better and most excellent articulation like the Prophet ﷺ. So when he was teaching the Sahabas, they look out his mouth and they understand every word in-depthly, very deep and bidiqqah. But right now we don't have a picture of the Prophet ﷺ while teaching the Sahabas. Now we have scholars that have documented for us in exactness how the Prophet ﷺ thought of these people, and that is what we want to incorporate now, inshallah. I cannot ingress in this without making my method, my manhaj, precise. Understanding the manhaj of every tutor, every presenter is very important in understanding whatever he utters. I looked at two dialectical groups, the Arabs and English. That is why sometimes I write in Arabic and explain in English, because of colleagues and friends in Arabs that tell me that they have been seeing this, they don't understand what is going on, they cannot cooperate. I said, inshallah, at least I will write it so that they can at least zoom what is on the board and understand what we are presenting. Then we go to the technological boundaries, al-mustalahat. There is no knowledge without mustalahat, and then understanding the mustalahat of every field of knowledge or every major contribute to understanding 80% of that field. So in here I will merge between the colloquial and standard grammar. Colloquial lugha amiyya, so that other people, the general public, will understand, and then the standardized one that will go for the 80% of my speech, inshallah, will go for the students of knowledge, and then the time that inshallah we will always stick to is written down there. We cannot enter into the knowledge of Tajweed without looking at the topic of composition, which is the glorious Quran. So we have to understand firstly, what is Quran? Why is Quran called Quran? Before we get there, we have to understand an important qadiyya, a topic. which has been emanated. The genesis of this is from knowledge of ulum al-Quran, which is the bulk of this knowledge, and the which knowledge of tajweed form as a subset. So we take marahil al-tadwin wal-isnad, the stages of documenting the Quran ranging from the time of the Prophet ﷺ down to us. And what is succession al-isnad? Isnad is the channel, the golden channel I will call it, or the vacuum in which the Quran was transmitted to us through something very important, something very golden, something very special, precious, something very precious that we call at-tawatur. Dozens of people pass the Quran to dozens of people. They also pass the Quran to a dozen of people, entrusted people, until it reached us. The knowledge or the wisdom behind that is this: they cannot agree on lies. It is totally impossible for these dozen millions of people to pass the same Quran to another generation. This generation pass the Quran on another generation on lies. This can never happen in the glorious Quran. A hujjah, a clear evidence on that is Quran, Surah Al-Hijr, verse 9, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, Inna nahnu nazzalna dhikra wa inna lahu lahafidhun. We descend the Quran and we are going to be the guardians of this Quran. So without taking much time, we look at the marahil al-tadwin, the stages in which the Quran passed through, which is very imperative before we start. Then we look at the mabadi al-ulum al-ashara lis-Sabbani Abu Arfan. This is very important because we're going to incorporate the knowledge of tajweed onto that. When you understand the 10 levels of knowledge, the 10 principles of knowledge, it will help you understand the in-depth of this knowledge, inshallah. Not only in tajweed, take every knowledge, jurisprudence, the knowledge of aqidah, every single field of knowledge, just put it on this measure. When you are able to have answer on every stage, inshallah, it means that your knowledge has origin and is very, very imperative to continue in this field if it is able to answer all the 10 stages. Okay, marahil, let us start with the first marhala. Most of the books expanded it to 5 marahil, stages, and some of the books expanded it to only 3 stages. There is a contradiction between this and that. All that I did is to merge between this and that, the two approach. The marahil, which is the stages, we have the qadima, we have the haditha. The qadima, as I said, which is how the Quran was preserved during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, down to the marhala of as-siddiqiyya and Umariyya. Maybe I can add that because Umar in the time of Abu Bakr was like the prime minister of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So the nubuwwah in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, then the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, then during the khilafah of Uthman ibn Affan. Then you look at the modern, it will come to mind like the emergence of the printing press from the 19th century downwards unto the resuscitation of technology and computers that we have. Now the Quran has many copies published in dozens and innumerable numbers and disseminated in all the territories in this world. This fall under the category of the modern stage of documenting the glorious Quran. And in here we also have this knowledge of ilm al-rasm al-Uthmani, the knowledge of scribing the Quran on the principle or on the rules of Uthman radiallahu anhu. That means that when the Quran revealed, the Sahabas wrote it based on how Allah wanted it to be written. That means that in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, which served as the first stage, Imam al-Tabari narrated a hadith that Zayd ibn Thabit said, when the Quran descended to the Prophet ﷺ, we used to be with him in his halaqah circle. So the Prophet ﷺ will dictate the Quran to us, and we will document the Quran down. When we finish documenting the Quran, he will then instruct us to read the Quran to him. So we will read the Quran how we write it to the Prophet. If there is any mistake, he will correct us. If there is no mistake, he will then instruct us to go out and convey the Quran to people. Now, on what do they normally record the Quran? They record it on thin stones, on palm leaves, on animal skins, and so on. I mean every kind of slate or tablet on which the Quran or writing can be recorded. So they write the Quran, but then it was in separate manners. And some Sahabas only wrote some portions of the Quran when it was in its early stage, and they've traveled now in countries in other territories to spread Islam. And there is something important that inshallah let you understand that we call Ardatul Akhira as part of the terminologies, the last review of the glorious Quran, of which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instructed Jibreel to descend to the Prophet ﷺ and listen to the review of the Quran from the Prophet ﷺ. That was in his last Ramadan of his life. So he reviewed the Quran twice. Then there were some Sahabas. One of them is the prominent Sahaba, Ubay ibn Ka'b. Allah instructed the Prophet ﷺ afterwards to read the entire Quran to Ubay. So when he was reading to Ubay, Ubay used to write, and some of the scribes of Wahy then wrote the Quran. What the Prophet ﷺ read in the Aradatul Akhira, the last review, is considered as part of the official Quran, and what the Prophet ﷺ didn't repeat it in the last review was put aside. That will let us understand an important marhala in the marhala of Uthmaniyya. Then comes the marhala of Siddiqiyya or Umariyya, the time of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Umar. Umar suggested to Abu Bakr as-Siddiq that when you look at the territories of the Muslims, now there is a lot of conquest for Futuhat, and then most of our memorizers are being killed. They are martyred. So what do you think if you compile the Quran under one single entity? Then Abu Bakr as-Siddiq said, Ma'adallah, how can I do something that the Prophet ﷺ has not done it in his lifetime? Forgetting that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, there wasn't need to document the Quran, because the Prophet himself was the Quran. So any ishkal that comes to the Sahabas, they return to the Prophet ﷺ as their reference, as their marja. And they now fear for the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said He will guide the Quran. But this is a normal fear, a fitrah, an innate fear in everyone. So Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, after the battle of Yamamah, in which one of the greatest Sahabas, Salim Mawla Hudhayfa, was martyred, of which this Salim, one day the Prophet was in his room, he heard an enticing voice in the masjid reciting the Quran. Then Aisha was going towards that voice and said, MashaAllah, what an enticing voice. The Prophet ﷺ, this is the voice of Salim Mawla Hudhayfa. Alhamdulillah alladhi ja'ala fi ummati mithla hadha. I thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for placing my ummah the like of this. So now Salim has been killed in the Ghazwa, in the battle of Yamamah. Then Abu Bakr as-Siddiq had his heart very open. He said, the suggestion of Umar is very important. We have to document the Quran in one single entity to be our official reference. Despite the fact that Uthman is a great hafiz, Umar, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Zayd ibn Thabit, most of the Sahabis, Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, most of them have traveled though, in Kufa, in Sham, in Sha'am, in Basra, and in Africa, in so many continents, sharing Islam. But then the Sahabas that were in Medina during the headquarters of the Islamic government also agreed to have part of the glorious Quran. So under the auspices of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he entrusted Zayd ibn Thabit. Don't forget that I said Zayd ibn Thabit is part of the scribes of Wahy during the time of the Prophet ﷺ. And the Prophet has endorsed for him. So he gathered the Quran from all the people under one single entity by measuring it to the last review of the Prophet ﷺ. So when it coincides with the last review of the Prophet, it is recorded. When it contradicts that, it is rejected. But still then, other Sahabas were in Medina until the time of Uthman ibn Affan. Hudhayfa returned to Uthman and he said, Ya Uthman, try to amalgamate the Ummah. Try to unite the Ummah before they disintegrate and segregate like the segregation of the Yahudi and Nasara. Why? Because it was time for Salah. This will recite with this riwayah, and this one will say, Akhtat, you've erred. You have to recite it like that. And this one is said, no, you lied. The Prophet taught me the Quran like that. So it has become a great challenge in the territories of the Muslims. So what Hudhayfa did was so much significant. He went back to Uthman and he said, try as much as you can to gather the Quran and then publish it into copies. So that is what Uthman did. Uthman didn't compile the Quran. All that he did was to take the Quran from the lifetime of Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and revive the Quran, revised the Quran and made copies of it and sent it to the territories of the Muslims. and send with every Quran an expertise, an expert in the field of Quran, teaching, for example, the people of Kufa a special qira'ah and riwayah, the people of Africa a special qira'ah and narration, the people of Basra a special qira'ah and narration, and so on. So in the time of Uthman, there was a lot of publications of the glorious Quran which was sent to all the Amsar, the Muslim territory. And don't forget, they didn't leave the last review, the Abdatul Akhirah of the Prophet ﷺ. So what Uthman did was that other people that didn't present in the last review of the Prophet ﷺ for the Quran, he took their Quran, bind them together, and he bent them. Because what the Prophet ﷺ read as the last thing is the last thing preserved for the glorious Quran. And that was what was made the final and the official complete copy of the glorious Quran. That is what we have until date. So this is it in short, this marahil. I have given it to you in short. Then we look at the marhala haditha, the using of computers and the using of technology in printing the Quran in many formats, and with the help of the knowledge of the Rasm al-Quran al-Uthmani shows that if we are to lose the Quran today, we can revive the Quran and make it in alignment to the Quran in the lifetime of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, with this knowledge that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed this ummah with. So this is short in the marahil. Inshallah, with our next meeting, we will talk about al-isnad, cessation, then we boil down to the mabadi al-ulum, then we ingress into the knowledge of tajweed. Stay blessed, dear brothers and sisters. Wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.